body cameras worn by two former Minneapolis officers are shedding new light into the death that set off protests around the world.
Hundreds of people peacefully protesting in downtown Harrisonburg last night, expressing frustration over the death of George Floyd and police brutality.
JMU has a porous boundary with our community and with our country. And there were major challenges that we were facing at all of those levels. How do you plant the conversation in the JMU community in a way that not only generates a lot of discussion, but also can generate some action?
President Alger convened this task force on racial equity. It was convened in the summer of 2020. And so many people know that the George Floyd killing occurred in May of 2020. Actually, President Alger had the idea for the task force before then, but there was a lot of interest and momentum to form the task force.
The community, the alumni, the faculty, staff, the students, so many disparate groups of people can do nothing but bring valuable insight and perspectives to the table.
As the leader of this university, I knew if we were going to have real, long-lasting culture change, it couldn't be top-down. It had to be bottom-up. It had to be the result of an inclusive process where people could see themselves in it. They could recognize their voices, their perspectives, and their work and their efforts. So I had no delusions that I could single-handedly transform the institution or make this happen. I knew that we needed everybody across the university and all the different constituencies, right? Starting with our students, but including the faculty and the staff and the alumni and members in the community around us to be involved, to participate, to have their voices heard. I really wanted this particular task force to model the values that we were talking about and espousing. So we could have put together a small group of a few people and asked them to write a report in a few weeks and come back and hand it in, and it could have sat on a shelf someplace. But I really wanted this to be different. I wanted this to be action-oriented and truly inclusive, because the process to me mattered almost as much as the ultimate recommendations that came out of this group.
That's not always an easy thing to do, to figure out what is the distinct role of these different groups, how are they going to communicate with each other, how do we make sure the voices of everyone are being heard and being incorporated into the recommendations. How do we ensure that the recommendations are vetted without sort of compromising the voices and the work of the people who originally wrote them? And so we had to come up with a lot of different processes.
And we were at such a time of urgency and wanting to just get something moving, and it was great to feel like the senior leadership at JMU got something moving right away. This is the biggest project I've ever been involved in at JMU, and I've been a part of different task forces in the last 20 years or so. And so the process was extremely important. And I was really grateful that the leaders of the task force, they brought in the leadership council, which was a really big group, so that we could work on process together. And it wasn't something necessarily easy at the beginning, but we got to a point where we collaborated and there were a lot of voices in the room, and that made me feel really good about participating in the project.
We kind of didn't really know what to expect. We didn't really know, it took us a while to kind of find our footing. Like at first we were just all meeting and holding each other at least to constant meetings and like brainstorming sessions and things of that nature. But then once we kind of broke up into subgroups and we started working with each other individually, that's when I think the real work started to begin.
The end game was providing John with key recommendations that can navigate and help transform the university related to race. So once we knew that that was the end game, now it was easy to say, how do we take individuals who are now asked to work together in working groups, and how do we build the system that provides some excellent recommendations that could get to the president, where the president then could respond to and provide great leadership in terms of working with his senior leadership team to implement, or at least begin the process of reviewing and discussing recommendations that are provided.
We talked at the very beginning that we expected the working groups to come up with ideas for the short term, the medium term, and the long term. And some of those ideas were big things. I didn't want them to feel limited or constrained, by finances or time. I said, We want it all. We want those different types of recommendations, some of which are going to cross traditional divisional boundaries and get into other people's business, so to speak, and that's where a process was developed to work with co-champions that were assigned by the various divisions across the university so that there could be follow-through and there could be conversation between the working group on the one hand that came up with the recommendation and the office or offices who were going to be responsible for having to examine it and carry it out. Now, the good thing about that, first of all, is that you could have a back and forth, that everybody learned through those conversations about what were we already doing, what were the barriers to progress, and how could we remove those barriers. And I think that process did create some moral authority for the people working on these issues, because they could point to the fact that, look, it wasn't just me or my office that came up with this idea, but the task force representing all of these different constituencies has come up with this proposal or this recommendation.
I started to think about when my peers were marching on the very first day of school and when they marched on the very last day of school. And their mission was that all of us must come together so we can be JM unity. And that was the mission, that was the vision of what they were trying to convey on that last day of school. And I believe if we were to gather again to now see that we're making actionable steps to what that march was, I see the hard work of my peers paying off.
The best potential of the recommendations that came out of this project is that they serve as a roadmap for what has to happen next, right? The recommendations are just that. They're the starting point for the work of trying to make changes. The work is still in front of us, right? 2 years of focused conversation generated some starting points, but now we have the work in front of us.